In the last video, we talked about what a rational number was. And of course, let's review that just to make sure that you are good on that. A rational number is basically any number, an integer, a fraction, a decimal. That's what rational numbers are. They're anything that you could take and put in a fraction. Remember the whole a over b as long as b doesn't equal 0? Well, the reason for that is that fractions are kind of like division problems. That's why whenever you're trying to turn a fraction into a decimal, you take the top number divided by the bottom number. That gives you your decimal. Well, if the bottom number is 0, you can't divide anything by 0. It just doesn't make sense. So since you can't do that, that's never going to give you an answer, so it's never going to give you a rational number. Okay? So rational numbers, integers, because remember, integers are any whole number, positive or negative. Rational numbers are also fractions, positive or negative fractions, and rational numbers are also decimals, positive or negative as well. Okay, so we need to keep that in mind when we're working with some of these things. Now, the next thing that we're going to move on to is taking those rational numbers and using them on a number line. Now, this can get a little bit tricky because we're dealing with decimals and fractions. When we're dealing with just plain integers, that's easy. But when we throw those fractions and decimals in there, that's where confusion starts. So hopefully we can just go ahead and skip that confusion part and get you understanding that. Okay, so that's what the point of this video is today. All right, so let's talk a little bit about number lines first. Now, number lines can come in a couple different ways. One that we're used to seeing a lot is this one, the horizontal. That's what it's called. It's called a horizontal number line because horizontal means kind of goes across, kind of flat. All right, and then there's also vertical, which are these. Vertical goes up and down. Okay, the way I always used to remember it, because I used to play basketball, is I used to talk about basketball players and their vertical leap. And basically what a vertical leap was is how far they jump off the ground. Okay? And I always remember that because I always wanted to know what my vertical leap was because I thought I could really jump high. Okay? The days of high school. Anyway, that's the difference between vertical and horizontal number lines. All right? Got it? Cool. Now, as we look at these number lines, we probably look at those and think, wait. There's some stuff missing. Usually on any number lines that I usually see, Mr. Meagher, I see a number on each little hash mark. You're missing some numbers, Mr. Meagher. That's not cool. Well, I've never been accused of being cool, so there you go. But anyway, sometimes you will run across number lines that do not have numbers written on each one, and usually that happens when you're working with decimals and fractions. Remember, I told you, we're going to be working with decimals and fractions with these rational numbers. So that's the reason why I did that. And I want to show you the easiest way with a fly flying in my face. This is awesome. Evidently the fly wants to know about rational numbers too. I can't stop learning, you know. I can't keep them from learning, even flies. Students, flies, parents, whatever. I'll teach anything. I'll teach anything. Anything in the animal world. All right. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about these number lines with the rational numbers, with the decimals, the fractions, and the integers, okay? Here's the best way when you see something like this, because I know you guys will be freaking out. Like, I don't know how to do this. This is unfamiliar. Hey, that's normal. Anything that's new and unfamiliar, we get a little nervous about, and that's okay. That's okay. We just got to take the time and get familiar with it so we're not so nervous. So let's take a look at probably the number line that we are the most familiar with is the horizontal one. We'll start with that one and work our way over to the horizontal one, okay? So let's look at this number line. We've got 0, which we know on number lines are always our starting point. And then we have a few little marks, and then we've got positive 1. Same thing on the left. Got a couple marks, and then a negative 1. Okay? Now, remember, when we go to the left on the number line, the numbers get smaller. Their values get smaller. Okay? The numbers themselves, what you see, may get bigger, but remember, the further left you go, the bigger the number, the smaller the value. To the right, it's just like when we've been counting since we were little. The farther you go to the right, the bigger the number. Okay? Just remember that. Okay, so why are we missing numbers? Well, because we all know that between each integer, each whole number, there are little pieces of a whole, and those can be represented as fractions or decimals. This is why we see this. Okay, now you're probably thinking, okay, well, I don't have all the fractions between 1 and -1 memorized, or all the decimals. Well, that's because there's so many of them that nobody has them memorized, and nobody expects you to have them memorized. But you can figure out the distance between each one of these little marks, and I'm going to show you how. First step is count how many spaces there are between all of the marks. That's our first step. So let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those spaces tell us how that distance between each integer, in this case, well, 0 is not an integer, but between 0 and -1, it's cut into 5 pieces. That's easy to figure out for a fraction. If we have 5 pieces, then that means that it's cut into fifths. So what that represents is, since we're on the negative side, we got to write our negative number, but this would be -1/5, -2/5, -3/5, and -4/5. Now, of course, 5/5 is 1 whole, which would be our -1. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. So we know now those are in fifths. So if they give us a fraction, say, okay, on the number line, put -3/5, put that on the number line, and they give you something without any of those, and you count the spaces, and you know, hey, that's in fifths. I know that I need to put a dot where 3/5 is, right there. Okay? Pretty simple. Now, that covers the fractions. But what about the decimals? Well, kind of the same way. With the decimals, we count the spaces in between, just like we did when we were trying to figure out what the fractions were. But we have to turn them into decimals. So, you can do it a couple of ways. Since we already know that we have 1/5, we can take 1/5, the fraction, and make it into a decimal. Here's how you do it in case you've forgotten how to turn a fraction into a decimal, which if you have, shame on you. I'm really disappointed. Still love you guys though, but it's okay. So remember, with a fraction to change into a decimal, you take the top number and divide it by the bottom number. So this bottom number goes on the outside, top number on the inside. Okay? And now we know 5 can't go into 1 evenly. So what we have to do is, of course, add a decimal. Don't forget to bring your decimal up as well. And add a 0. Now, we can divide. 5 will go into 10 how many times? Right, twice. 5 times 2, 10. Okay, so we know 1/5 equals 2/10, right? Okay, so this one is -2/10. Okay, now, with each one, we just double it. So we double this one. Okay, well, we don't actually double them, but we just multiply them by 2. So the next one. Okay, and then the next one, of course, would be, I'm running out of room. Because I'm running out of room, I don't want confusion, so I'm going to erase it right a little bit smaller. Okay, so basically what we're doing for each fifth, we're adding whatever the value as a decimal for 1/5 is, we're adding them together. So we've got 2/5, well that means we've got 2 of 2/10. So we add those two together, we get 4/10. 3, okay, that's 3 of those 2/10. We add those together, that gets us 6. Same thing with 4. Add 4 of those 2/10 together, you got it, okay? And that will tell you kind of where we can place those on the number line, okay? All right, so looking at all of that, knowing what we know, if they were going to give me a fraction, so let's say that it was going to be +3/5. Where would we put that on that number line? Well, since we know each one of those is 1/5, we look wherever 3/5 is, go to the third line, 3/5. Okay? But what if they give us a decimal? What about 75 hundredths? Ooh, that's a little tougher, isn't it? If we look, we've got, and we know that this is going to be the same over here, just positive. These are all negatives. But since the spaces are the same, we've got 5 spaces on the positive side, it's going to be the same thing, just on the positive part of it, okay? So we know this is positive 2/10, positive 4/10, positive 6/10, positive 8/10, and then 1. But if I look at this, I don't see in any of those what this is. So we got to figure out, oh, where does that go? Now, you don't have to be extremely accurate, but you have to be close. You can make an approximation, which we've talked about what an approximation is. It's being close. It's another word for being close, okay? So I look at my 75 hundredths. Now, I know that I've got 2/10 here, 4/10, 6/10, 8/10, okay? Now, I know I've got 75 hundredths. Ooh, that looks a little scary. Well, what I have to do is, remember, anytime that you have a decimal like this, 6/10, okay, so, voice crack. I can have a bunch of zeros here. I just don't have to write them every time, but I can add those zeros if I need to compare some of the decimals. So let's look at 6/10, and we're going to compare it with 75 hundredths. Okay? So here's the thing. No zero there, but I can add one, and I can compare them. Is 75 hundredths bigger than 6/10? Absolutely it is, so that I know that it's going to be bigger than 6/10. So I know it's going to be to the right of 6/10. So now I can compare it with the next one. What's the next one? 8/10. I add my 0, and I compare them. 75 hundredths against 8/10, or 80 hundredths, whatever you'd like to say. Is this one bigger than this one? No, it's smaller. So I know it's bigger than 6/10, smaller than 8/10, so it's got to be in between. So I put it right here. Okay, good? Gotcha. Now, let's talk about the vertical line. Now, remember, we're going to count the spaces. Same thing. This is no different than this, except that they've just kind of put it on its head. They're standing it up. So, I'm going to count my spaces once again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's broken up into tenths. So I know that this is 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10, and of course 10/10 as a whole. Same thing with the negatives. Okay? So if I give you another fraction, let's say it is 7/10. Where would I put it? Well, I know that it's positive, so I'm going to go up. On a vertical number line, up, positive, down, negative. Okay? So I'm going to go up 7 places. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right here. That's where it would go. Make sense? Same thing with the negatives. Okay, it's going to be the same thing. So remember, we've got to think about it. Okay, just think. Slow down and think. I know you guys like to rush, but just slow down and think. A little long-winded today, but I wanted to make sure that you guys understand that, okay? One more example, I'll let you go. You've got better things to do than stare at my ugly mug all day, okay? So let's go with the vertical one, and I'm going to give you a negative this time. Remember, negatives go down. So let's do negative 3/5. 3/5. That's kind of tough. That's really tough, isn't it? So what you have to do is, you know, each one of these are tenths. So what you can do is you make them as like fractions, okay? Or you can change them to decimals. I would advise probably changing it to a decimal, but then that would mean you would have to change them all to decimals. That could be a lot of work. I know 6th graders don't like to do extra work. Okay, so let's look at this. So I could also change this to where I have like denominators, like bottom numbers. So I know that the bottom numbers on these fractions for these are tenths. So can I change this bottom number to a 10? Absolutely. Just have to figure out how to do it. So what I do, multiply it by 2. There's my 10th. And remember, whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. And don't forget, we've got a negative sign here as well. Negative 6/10. Can I put that on the line? Absolutely. Can totally do that. Okay? All right? So, remember, both ways that you can do it. If you do it with a fraction, find out what fractions these are. If it's a decimal, turn those fractions into a decimal. It's easy. Hopefully that helps. And if you need to look at this over and over again, great. Any questions, email me or put a comment below. Hopefully that helps. We'll see you soon.